Welcome to Executive Order Watch.
The immigrants have arrived.
I know. I have the package.
$551 highest bid is less than the national min. One minimum acceptable bid shall be offered to promptly within 30 days for leasing under 3 subsection of this section, and shall remain available for leasing for a period of 2 years after the competitive lease sale. 6 and 7. By adding at the end the following 8. If the United States held a vested future and trust in a mineral estate that, immediately prior to B10 coming a vested present interest, was subject to a lease 11 under which oil or gas was being produced, or had a well 12 capable of producing, in paying quantities at an annual 13 average production volume per well per day of either not 14 more than 15 barrels per day of oil or condensate, or not 15 more than 60,000 cubic feet of gas, the holder of the lease May 16th elect to continue the lease as a non-competitive lease 17 under subsection. An election under this paragraph is effective 19. In the case of an interest which vested after January 21st, 1990, and on or before October 24th, 1992, if the election is made before the date that is 22. 1 year after October 24th, 1992. 23 in the case of an interest which vests with 24 in 1 year after October 24th, 1992, if the election is 25. 552. Made before the date that is 2 years after October 1st, 1992, and 2 in any case other than those described in 3 clause, or if the election is made prior to the 4 interest becoming a vested present interest. 5. By striking subsection and inserting the 6 following. 7. Stub to use berst. If the lands to be leased are not leased under subsection of this section, or are not subject to competitive leasing under subsection of this section, the person first making application for the lease, who is qualified to hold a lease under this chapter, shall be entitled to a lease of such lands without competitive bidding upon payment of a non-refundable application fee of at least $75. A lease under this subsection shall be conditioned upon the payment of a royalty at a rate of 12.5% in amount or value of the production removed or sold from the lease. Leases shall be issued within 60 days of the date on which the Secretary identifies the first responsible qualified applicant. 553. Lands which were posted for sale under subsection of this section, but for which no bids were received, or for which the highest bid was less than the national minimum acceptable bid, and for which, at the end of the period referred to in subsection of this section, no lease has been issued, and no lease application is pending under paragraph of this subsection, shall again be available for leasing only in accordance with subsection of this section. The land in any lease which is issued under paragraph of this subsection, or under subsection of this section which lease terminates, expires, is cancelled, or is relinquished, shall again be available for leasing only in accordance with subsection of this section. By striking subsection and inserting the following. PT, competitive and non-competitive leases issued under this section shall be for a primary term of 10 years, provided, however, that competitive leases issued in special tar sand areas shall also be for a primary term of 10 years. Each such lease shall continue so long after its primary term as oil or gas is produced in paying quantities. Any lease issued under this section. 554. for land on which, or for which under an approved Cooper, 1/8 or unit plan of development or operation. Actual drill, twoing operations were commenced prior to the end of its pre-3 term, and are being diligently prosecuted at that time. 4 shall be extended for 2 years and so long thereafter as 5 oil or gas is produced in paying quantities. Failure to CWP revisions of 7L. Section 31 of the Mineral Leasing Act is amended. 9. In subsection by striking section 1017 and inserting subsection or of sec 11-17 of this act. 12. In subsection 13. In paragraph 14. By inserting either after rentals 15 and 16. By inserting or the inclusion in a 17 reinstated lease issued pursuant to the Pro 18 visions of section 17 of this act of a Re 19 requirement that future rentals shall be at a 20 rate not less than $5 per acre per year. 21 all before as determined by the Sec 22 Retary and 23. By amending paragraph to read as 24 follows. 25. 555. Payment of back royalties and the inclusion in a reinstated lease issued pursuant to the provisions of section 17 of this act of a requirement for future royalties at a rate of not less than 16.3% computed on a sliding scale based upon the average production per well per day at a rate which shall be not less than 4 percentage points greater than the competitive royalty schedule then in force and used for royalty determination for competitive leases issued pursuant to such section as determined by the Secretary, provided that royalty on such reinstated lease shall be paid on all production removed or sold from such lease subsequent to the termination of the original lease. Payment of back royalties and inclusion in a reinstated lease issued pursuant to the provisions of section 17 of this act of a requirement for future royalties at a rate not less than 16.3%. Provided that royalty on such reinstated lease shall be paid all production removed or sold from such lease subsequent to the cancellation or termination of the original lease. And 556. In paragraph, by striking in the one same manner as the original lease issued pursuant to and to section 17, and inserting as a competitive type or a non-competitive oil and gas lease in the same manner as the original lease issued pursuant 5 and to subsection or of section 17 of this 6 Act. 7. By adding at the end the following 8. Except as otherwise provided in this section, the 9 issuance of a lease in lieu of an abandoned patented oil 10 placer mining claim shall be treated as a non-competitive 11 oil and gas lease issued pursuant to section 17 of this 12 Act. 13. In subsection by striking subsection 14 and inserting subsections N 15 by amending subsection to read as full 16 lows 17. RR 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Enacting on a petition to issue a non-competitive oil and gas lease under subsection of this section or in response to a request filed after issuance of such a lease. Or both, the Secretary is authorized to reduce the royalty on such lease if in his judgment it is equitable to do so or the circumstances warrant such relief due to uneconomic. 557. Or other circumstances which could cause undue hardship or premature termination of production. Enacting on a petition for reinstatement pursuant to subsection of this section or in response to a request filed after reinstatement, or both, the Secretary is authorized to reduce the royalty in that reinstates on the entire leasehold or any tract or portion thereof segregated for royalty purposes if, in his judgment, there are uneconomic or other circumstances which could cause undue hardship or premature termination of production, or because of any written action of the United States, its agents or employees which preceded and was a major consideration in the lessee's expenditure of funds to develop the property under the lease after the rent had become due and had not been paid, or if in the judgment of the Secretary it is equitable to do so for any reason. By adding at the end the following 19. Where an unpatented oil placer 21 mining claim validly located prior to February 24th, 1920-22, which has been or is currently producing or is capable of 23 producing oil or gas, has been or is hereafter deemed con 2024 conclusively abandoned for failure to file timely the required 558 instruments or copies of instruments required by Section 1, 1744 of Title 43. And it is shown to the satisfaction of the Secretary that such failure was inadvertent, justify 3able, or not due to lack of reasonable diligence on the part 4 of the owner. The Secretary may issue, for the lands Cove 5 aired by the abandoned unpatented oil placer mining claim, 6 and non-competitive oil and gas lease, consistent with the Pro 7 visions of Section 17 of this Act, to be effective from 8, the statutory date the claim was deemed conclusively 9 abandoned. Issuance of such a lease shall be conditioned 10 upon 11. A petition for issuance of a non-competitive oil and gas lease, together with the required rental and royalty, including back rental and royalty accruing from the statutory date of abandonment of the oil placer mining claim, being filed with the Secretary. 12, 13, 14, 15, since 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 20, 23, 24, 25. With respect to any claim deemed conclusively abandoned on or before January 12, 1983, on or before the 120th day after January 12, 1983, or with respect to any claim deemed conclusively abandoned after January 12, 1983, on or before the 120th day after final notification by the Secretary or a 559 Court of Competent Jurisdiction of the determination of the abandonment of the oil placer mining claim. A valid lease not having been issued affecting any of the lands covered by the abandoned oil placer mining claim prior to the filing of such petition. Provided, however, that after the filing of a petition for issuance of a lease under this subsection, the Secretary shall not issue any new lease affecting any of the lands covered by such abandoned oil placer mining claim for a reasonable period, as determined in accordance with regulations issued by him. A requirement in the lease for payment of rental, including back rentals accruing from the statutory date of abandonment of the oil placer mining claim, of not less than $5 per acre per year. A requirement in the lease for payment of royalty on production removed or sold from the oil placer mining claim, including all royalty on production made subsequent to the statutory date the claim was deemed conclusively abandoned, of not less than 2%. Compliance with the notice and reimbursement of cost provisions of paragraph of subsection, but addressed to the petition covering the 560. SCC 80,103, permit fees. The Secretary of the Interior shall approve applications allowing for the commingling of production from 2 or more sources, including the area of an oil and gas lease, the area included in a drilling spacing unit, a unit partition, painting area, a communitized area, or non-federal property, before production reaches the point of royalty measurement, regardless of ownership, the royalty rates, and the number or percentage of acres for each source if the applicant pays an application fee of $10, and agrees to install measurement devices for each source. Utilize an allocation method that achieves volume measurement uncertainty levels within plus or minus 2% during the production phase reported on a monthly basis, or utilize an approved periodic well testing methodology. Production from multiple oil and gas leases, drilling spacing units, communitized areas, or participating areas. 561. From a single wellbore shall be considered a single source. Nothing in this subsection shall prevent the Secretary of the Interior from continuing the current practice of exercising discretion to authorize higher percentage, volume measurement uncertainty levels, if appropriate technical and economic justifications have been provided. Revenue allocation. Fees received under this subsection shall be deposited into the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. The Secretary shall establish, by regulation not later than 2 years after the date of enactment of this subsection, A permit by rule process under which a leaseholder may receive approval to drill for oil and gas if the leaseholder certifies compliance with such regulations and pays a fee of $5,000. Such permit by rule process shall allow drilling operations to commence no later than 45 days after the leaseholder has filed a registration that certifies compliance with such regulations and paid the fee required by this paragraph. Our revenue allocation. Fees received under this subsection shall be deposited into the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. 562. SCC 80,104. Permitting fee for non-federal land. IG. Notwithstanding Section 17 of the 2 Mineral Leasing Act, but subject to any 3 applicable state requirements, the Secretary of the INTI 4 RIER shall not require a permit to drill for an oil and gas 5 lease under the Mineral Leasing Act for an action occur 6 ring within an oil and gas drilling or spacing unit if the 7 leaseholder pays a fee of $5. 000 and 8. The federal government, 9. Owns less than 50% of the Min 10 arrows within the oil and gas drilling or spacing 11 unit and 12. Does not own or lease the surface ES-13 Tate within the area directly impacted by the 14 action, or 15. The well is located on non-federal land over 16 lying a non-federal mineral estate, but some portion 17 of the wellbore traverses, but does not produce from 18 the federal mineral estate subject to the lease. And for each state permit to drill 20 or drilling plan that would impact or extract oil and gas 21 by the federal government 22. Each lessee of federal minerals in the unit 23 or designee of a lessee shall 24. Notify the Secretary of the Interior of 25 the submission of a state application for a per 26. 563. Permit to drill or drilling plan on submission of the application. Provide a copy of the application described in subparagraph to the Secretary of the Interior not later than 5 days after the date on which or plan is submitted, and pay to the Secretary of the Interior the $5,000 fee referenced in subsection of this section. Each lessee designee of a lessee or applicable state shall notify the Secretary of the Interior of the approved state permit to drill or drilling plan not later than 45 days after the date on which the permit or plan is approved. Each lessee or designee of a lessee shall provide, prior to commencing drilling operations, agreements authorizing the Secretary of the Interior to enter non-federal land as necessary for inspection and enforcement of the terms of the federal lease. Nothing in this section affects the amount of royalties due to the federal government from the production of the federal minerals within the oil and gas drilling or spacing unit. 564. Fees received under this section shall be deposited into the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. A. Authority. Section 417 of the Mineral Leasing Act is 5 amended 6. By striking the subsection designation, and 7 all that follows through Secretary of the Interior. 8 are in the first sentence and inserting the following 9. 11. I, the Secretary of the INTI 12 RIER, and 13. By adding at the end the following 14. A. Federal land. 15. I, in the case of an oil 16 and gas lease under this act on land described 17 in subparagraph, locate an oil and an 18 gas drilling or spacing unit. Nothing in this Act 19 authorizes the Secretary of the Interior to 20. Require a bond to protect non-21 federal land. 22. Enter non-federal land without 23. The consent of the applicable landowner. 24. 565. Impose mitigation requirements. 1 or 2 require approval for surface rec 3 limation. Land referred to in subpara 5 graph is land where 6. The federal government, 7. Owns less than 50% of 8, the minerals within the oil and gas 9 drilling or spacing unit. And 10 does not own or lease the 11 surface estate within the area directly 12 impacted by the action. 13. The well is located on non-fed 14 arrow land, overlying a non-federal mineral 15 estate, but some portion of the wellbore and 16 turs and produces from the federal Min 17 aerial estate subject to the lease. Or 18, the well is located on non-Fed 19 aerial land overlying a non-federal mineral 20 estate, but some portion of the wellbore 21 traverses, but does not produce from the 22 federal mineral estate subject to the lease. 23. Federal action. An oil and 24 gas exploration or production activity carried 25. 566. Out under a lease described in subparagraph 1. 2. Shall require no federal action. 3 and 4 may commence 30 days after the 5 leaseholder submits the state permit to the 6th Secretary. SEC 80,105. Reinstate reasonable royalty rates. 8. OOGRR, Sec. 9 8 of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act is amended 11. In subparagraph, by striking not less than 16%, but not more than 18%, during the 10-year period beginning on the date of enactment of the Act, titled An Act to Provide for Reconciliation pursuant to Title II of S. Con. Res. 14, and not less than 16.3% thereafter, and inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 18%. In subparagraph, by striking not less than 16%, but not more than 18%, during the 10-year period beginning on date of enactment of the Act titled An Act to Provide for Reconciliation pursuant to Title II of S. Con. Res. 14, and not less than 16.3% thereafter, and 567. Inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 18%. In subparagraph, by striking not less than 16%, but not more than 18%, during the 10-year period beginning on the date of enactment of the Act titled An Act to Provide for Reconciliation pursuant to Title II of S. Con. Res. 14, and not less than 16.3% thereafter, and inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 18%. And in subparagraph, by striking not less than 16%, but not more than 18%, during the 10-year period beginning on the date of enactment of the Act titled An Act to Provide for Reconciliation pursuant to Title II of S. Con. Res. 14, and not less than 16.3% thereafter, and inserting not less than 12.5%, but not more than 18%. OGRR Section 17 of the Mineral Leasing Act is amended. In subsection. In paragraph, by striking the Act titled An Act to Provide for Reconciliation. 568. Pursuant to Title of S. Con. Res. 14.16.3, and inserting subsection 12.5. In paragraph, by striking 16.3% and inserting 16%, or in the case of a lease issued on or after the date of enactment of subsection 12.5%. In subsection, by striking 16.3%, each place it appears, and inserting 16%, or in the case of a lease issued on or after the date of enactment of subsection 12.5%. And in subsection, by striking 16% and inserting 16%, or in the case of a lease issued on or after the date of enactment of subsection 12.5%. Part 2, Geothermal. SEC 80,111, Geothermal Leasing. Section 4 of the Geothermal Steam Act of 1970 is amended in paragraph by striking 2 years and inserting year, by adding at the end the following. Are replacement sales. If a lease sale under paragraph for a year is canceled or delayed, the Secretary of the Interior shall conduct a replacement sale during the same year. 569. R. In conducting a lease sale under paragraph in a state described in that paragraph, the Secretary of the Interior shall offer all nominated parcels eligible for geothermal development and utilization under a land use plan developed or revised under Section 202 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 that is in effect for the state. SEC 80,112, Geothermal Royalties. Section 5 of the Geothermal Steam Act of 1970 is amended in subparagraph by inserting with respect to each electric generating facility producing electricity before not less than, by by inserting by such facility after produced. In subparagraph, by inserting with respect to each electric generating facility producing electricity before, not less than, and by inserting by such facility after produced. 570. Part 3 Alaska. 1 second 80121. Coastal plain oil and gas leasing. 2. D in this section 3. C. Coastal plain. The term coastal or plain has the meaning given the term in section 520001 of Public Law 11597. Oil and gas program. The term oil and gas program means the oil and gas program not established under section 20001 of Public Law 101597. 11. S. The term secretary means 12. The Secretary of the Interior. 13. A. Not later than 30 days after 14, the date of enactment of this act, the Secretary shall 15. Withdraw 16. The supplemental environmental impact 17 statement described in the notice of availability 18 of the Bureau of Land Management, entitled 19 Notice of Availability of the Final Coastal 20 Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program, Supple 21 Mental Environmental Impact Statement, Alas 22, 23, and 24. The record of decision described in the 25 Notice of Availability of the Bureau of Land 26. 571. Management entitled Notice of Availability of the Record of Decision for the Final Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement for the Coastal Plain Oil Gas Leasing Program Alaska. The environmental impact statement described in the Notice of Availability of the Bureau of Land Management, entitled Notice of Availability of the Final Environmental Impact Statement for the Coastal Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program, Alaska. The record of decision described in the Notice of Availability of the Bureau of Land Management, entitled Notice of Availability of the Record of Decision for the Final Environmental Impact Statement for the Coastal Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program, Alaska. Acceptance of bids. Not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of this act, the Secretary shall, without modification or delay, 572. Accept the highest valid bid for each coastal plain lease tract for which a valid bid was received on January 6, 2021, pursuant to the requirement to hold the first lease sale under Section 20001 of Public Law 11597. Provide the appropriate lease form to each successful bidder under subparagraph to execute and return to the Secretary. The applicable regulations, as in effect on January 6, 2021. The terms and conditions of the record of decision described in subsection. Terms and conditions. Leases reissued pursuant to this subsection shall include the terms and conditions from the record of decision described in the Notice of Availability of the Bureau of Land. Lease issuance. On receipt of an executed lease form under paragraph and payment in accordance with that lease of the rental for the first year, the balance of the bonus bid and any required bond or security from the successful bidder, the Secretary shall promptly issue to the successful bidder a fully executed lease, in accordance with 573. Management entitled Notice of Availability of the Record of Decision for the Final Environmental Impact Statement for the Coastal Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program, Alaska. This subsection shall not apply to any bid for which a lease was issued and subsequently relinquished by the successful bidder prior to the date of enactment of this act. Subject to paragraph. In addition to the lease sales required under Section 20001 of Public Law 11597, the Secretary shall conduct not fewer than 4 lease sales wide under the oil and gas program by not later than 10 years after the date of the enactment of this act. Sale acreages. The Secretary shall offer an initial lease sale under paragraph not later than 1 year after the date of the enactment of this act. A second lease sale under paragraph not later than 3 years after the date of the enactment of this act. 574. A third lease sale under paragraph not later than 5 years after the date of the enactment of this act. A fourth lease sale under paragraph not later than 7 years after the date of the enactment of this act. Leasing certainty. The record of decision described in subsection shall be considered to satisfy the requirements of the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, Public Law 11597, the Endangered Species Act of 1973, not fewer than 400,000 acres area-wide in each lease sale, including those areas that have the highest potential for the discovery of hydrocarbons, or the total number of unleased acres subject to the provisions of this section if that total number of available acres is less than 400,000 acres. 575. Subchapter 2 of Chapter 5 of Title 5, United States Code, and Chapter 7 of Title 5, United States Code. The Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. LI leases shall be reissued or issued under subsections and not later than 60 days after payment by the successful bidder of the remainder of the bonus bid, if any, and the annual rental for the first lease year, in accordance with the applicable regulations as in effect on January 6, 2021. In accordance with the terms and conditions from the record of decision described in the Notice of Availability of the Bureau of Land Management entitled Notice of Availability of the Record of Decision for the Final Environmental Impact Statement for the Coastal Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program Alaska. GS. Not later than 30 days after the date on which the Secretary receives a complete application to Section 3152.1 of Title 43, Code of Federal Regulations to conduct oil and gas geophysical exploration operations in 576. The coastal plain, the Secretary shall approve such application. R. Notwithstanding Section 35 of the Mineral Leasing Act and Section 20001 of Public Law 11597, of the amount of adjusted bonus, rental, and royalty receipts derived from the oil and gas program and operations on the coastal plain pursuant to this section. For fiscal years 2025 through 2034, 50% shall be paid to the state of Alaska. For fiscal year 2035 and thereafter, 90% shall be paid to the state of Alaska. The balance shall be deposited into the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. I accept as provided in paragraph, no court shall have jurisdiction to review any action taken by the Secretary, the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, or a state or municipal government administrative agency to reissue a lease pursuant to subsection, or issue a lease under a lease sale conducted under subsection, or grant or issue a right-of-way, easement, authorization, permit, verification, bio. 577. Logical opinion, incidental take statement, or other approval for a lease reissued pursuant to subsection or issued under a lease sale conducted under subsection, whether reissued or issued prior to or after the date of the enactment of this act, and including any lawsuit or any other action pending in a court as of the date of enactment of this act. Petition by leaseholder. N. A leaseholder of the state of Alaska may obtain a review of an alleged failure by the Secretary to act in accordance with this section or with any law pertaining to granting or issuing a lease, right-of-way, easement, authorization, permit, verification, biological opinion, incidental take statement, or other approval related to a lease under this section by filing a written petition with a court of competent jurisdiction seeking an order. D. If a court of competent jurisdiction finds pursuant to subparagraph that an agency has failed to act in accordance with this section, or with any law pertaining to granting or issuing a lease right-of-way, ease. 578. Meant authorization, permit verification, bio one logical opinion, incidental take statement, or two other approval related to a lease under this section. The court shall set a schedule and deadline for the agency to act as soon as practicable. 5. Which shall not exceed 90 days from the date 6 on which the order of the court is issued, unless 7. The court determines a longer time period is 8 necessary to comply with applicable law. 9. SCC 80,122, National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. Effective beginning on the date of enactment of this act, the Secretary shall expeditiously restore and resume the program for domestic energy production to generate federal revenue, subject to the requirements of Section 107 of the Naval Petroleum Reserve Production Act of 1976. Cease to implement, administer, or enforce the regulations contained in Part 2360 of Title 43, Code of Federal Regulations. D. In this subsection. P. The term program means the Competitive Oil and Gas Leasing 579. Exploration, Development, and Production Program 1 established under Section 107 of the Naval Petroleum Reserves Production Act of 1976. 4. S. The term Secretary 5 means the Secretary of the Interior. The Naval Petroleum Reserves Pro 7 Duction Act of 1976 is amended by inserting before Section 8101 the following 9 SEC 100. Purpose. The purpose of this act is to require and facilitate 11. A leasing program in the National Petroleum Reserve in 12 Alaska for the expeditious exploration, development, and 13 production of petroleum to meet the energy needs of the 14 nations in the world. In order to accomplish this purpose, 15. The Secretary shall, in consultation with the state of Alaska 16K and the North Slope Borough, Alaska Expedite Admin 17 Illustration of the Program for Domestic Energy Production 18 and Federal Revenue as prescribed in Section 107 of the 19 Naval Petroleum Reserves Production Act of 1976. 21. RLS Section 107 of the 22 Naval Petroleum Reserves Production Act of 1976 is amended. 24. 580. By striking FLS, the first, and inserting RLS. The first lease. By adding at the end the following. Subsequent lease sales. I in general. Subject to subparagraph beginning in the first full calendar year after the date of enactment of this paragraph. The Secretary shall conduct an oil and gas lease sale in the reserve not less frequently than once every 2 years. A. The Secretary shall offer not fewer than 4 million acres in each lease sale conducted under subparagraph. Terms and stipulations for NPR lease sales. In conducting lease sales under this paragraph, the Secretary shall offer the same lease form as Lease Form AK 3131 and the same lease terms, economic conditions, and stipulations as described in the NPR. A record of decision published by the Bureau of Land Management entitled National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska Integrated Activity Plan Record of Decision. 581. Section 107 of the Naval Petroleum Reserves Production Act of 1976 is amended. 3. By striking all receipts from and insert foring the following. 5. I accept as provided in para 6 graph all receipts from and 7. By adding at the end the following. 8. Percent share for fiscal year 2035 9. Beginning in fiscal year 2035, 10 of the receipts described in paragraph 11. 90% shall be paid to the state 12 of Alaska and 13. 10% shall be paid into the 14 Treasury of the United States. F. Section 07 of the Naval 16 Petroleum Reserves Production Act of 1976 is amended to read as follows. 18. Subsequent lease sales. The detailed 19 environmental study and assessments that have been 20 conducted and identified in the document titled No 21 Tice of Availability of the National Petroleum Re-22 Serve in Alaska Integrated Activity Plan Final NV 23 Environmental Impact Statement are deemed to fulfill the required 25. 582. Amendments of the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 with regard to the oil and gas lease sales re-2 acquired by subsection GS. Section 107 of the Naval Petroleum Reserve 5 Production Act of 1976 is amended 6 by adding at the end the following. 7. GS, not later than 38 days after the date on which the Secretary of the Interior 9 receives a complete application pursuant to Section 3001, 152.110 of Title 43, Code of Federal Regulations, to conduct oil and gas geophysical exploration operations in the National Petroleum Reserve in 13 Alaska. The Secretary of the Interior shall approve such 14 application. 15. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I accept as provided in paragraph. No court shall have jurisdiction to review any action taken by the Secretary of the Interior or a state or municipal government administrative agency to grant or issue a right-of-way, easement, authorization, permit, verification, biological opinion, incidental take statement, or other approval for a lease issued under this act, whether issued prior to, on, or after the date of the enactment of this sub 583 section, and including any lawsuit or any other action pending in a court as of the date of enactment of this subsection. Petition by leaseholder. A leaseholder or the state of Alaska may obtain a review of an alleged failure by the Secretary of the Interior to act in accordance with this act by filing a written petition with a court of competent jurisdiction seeking an order. D. If a court of competent jurisdiction finds pursuant to subparagraph that an agency has failed to act in accordance with this act, the court shall set a schedule and deadline for the agency to act as soon as practicable, which shall not exceed 90 days from the date on which the order of the court is issued, unless the court determines a longer time period is necessary to comply with applicable law. Part 4 Mining. SEC 80,131. Superior National Forest Lands in Minnesota. R. The Public Land Order of the Bureau of Land Management titled Public Land Order No. 584. 7917 for withdrawal of federal lands, Cook, Lake, and 1 St. Louis counties. MN is hereby rescinded and shall have number 3 force or effect. R. Einstatement Term Modifica 7. 8. R. Notwithstanding 9 Reorganization Plan Number 3 of 1946, Section 2478 of the Revised Statutes. The Act of June 30th, 1950, 6412 Stat. 311, 16 U.S.C. 508B, and the Act of March 13th, 4th, 1917, 14, and not later than 5 calendar days after the 15th date of the enactment of this section, the Sec. 16 reitary shall reinstate each covered lease. Upon reinstatement of 18 each covered lease under subparagraph 19, each covered lease shall have a 20 initial term of 20 years from the date of 20 such reinstatement and a right to success 22 sive renewals in accordance with paragraph 23. 24. 585. The Secretary shall toll the initial term of a covered lease during any period in which permitting activities of the covered lease are delayed by legal or administrative proceedings not initiated by the holder of the covered lease. The Secretary shall extend the initial term of a covered lease by a period equal to any tolling period under clause. Except as modified by this section, all terms and conditions of each covered lease shall be in accordance with the original terms of the covered lease. Revenue provisions. R. Einstatement fee. Upon reinstatement of each covered lease under paragraph, the holder of a covered lease shall pay to the Secretary a one-time fee of $100 per acre of the covered lease. Supplemental rental. In addition to the rental payment specified in the reinstated covered lease, the holder of a covered lease shall pay to the Secretary an annual supplemental rental of $10 per acre of the covered lease during 586. In years 6 through 10 of the initial term of the covered lease. R. Revenue allocation. All revenues collected under this paragraph shall be deposited in the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. Grant of preference right Hard Rock. C. Congressional grant. Notwithstanding Reorganization Plan Number 3 of 1946, Section 2478 of the Revised Statutes, the Act of June 30th, 1950, 64 Stat. 311, 16 U.S.C. 508B, and the Act of March 4th, 1917. And in recognition of the valid existing rights created through the finding of a valuable mineral deposit as determined by the issuance of a notice of preliminary valuable deposit determination from the Bureau of Land Management. Congress hereby grants to any holder of a notice of preliminary valuable deposit determination issued between January 20th, 2017 and January 20th, 2021, a preference right hard rock mineral lease subject to the terms described in this paragraph. 587. Except as provided in clause, be subject to the same terms and conditions as adjacent covered leases, as modified by this section. Be deemed part of the unified mining operation with adjacent covered leases for purposes of mine planning and operations, and not be required to meet the diligence requirements of adjacent covered leases until the date on which the first term of the preference right hard rock mineral lease, after the lease is renewed under paragraph begins. Revenue provisions. I, upon the grant of each preference right hard rock mineral. 588. Lease under subparagraph, the holder one of each lease shall pay to the Secretary 2. A one-time issuance fee of $250 per acre of the preference right for hard rock mineral lease. 5. An annual rental payment of $61 per acre of the preference right 7 hard rock mineral lease per year. And 8. A production royalty in A9 accordance with the terms and conditions described in subparagraph 11. 12. Deposit of amounts. Amounts 13 collected under this subparagraph shall be 14 deposited in the Treasury as miscellaneous 15 receipts. Renewal provisions. Renewal qualification. If, during the last 2 years of each initial or renewal term of a lease reinstated, granted, or renewed under this subsection, the holder of the lease requests renewal, the Secretary shall renew the lease in accordance with this paragraph. 589. In genera, not later than 90 days before the date on which the term of a lease for which the holder of the lease requests renewal under subparagraph ends, the holder of the lease shall pay to the Secretary a renewal fee of $100 per acre of the lease. Are renewal required? Upon receipt of a renewal request under subparagraph and the renewal fee required under clause of this subparagraph, the Secretary shall renew the lease that is the subject of the renewal request for an additional 10-year term. Renewal conditions. Mine plan of operations not required during initial. Approval of a mine plan of operations is not required during the initial term of a lease reinstated or granted under this subsection. Minimum production requirements as described in adjacent. 590. Covered leases shall begin with respect to a lease reinstated or granted under this section on the date that is 5 years after the approval of a mine plan of operations for such lease. Annual rental payments. The annual rental payment for a lease renewed under this subsection shall be $2 per acre more than the annual rental payment of such lease during the preceding term of such lease. In general, the reinstatement, modification, or grant of a lease, or a combination thereof under this section is not subject to judicial review. Notwithstanding subparagraph, the holder of a lease reinstated, modified, or granted under this subsection may seek review of an alleged failure by the Secretary to act in accordance with this section. In this section, C. The term covered lease means a hard rock mineral lease. 591. Located within the Superior National Forest in the state of Minnesota. 2. Issued or renewed in between January 3rd, 2017 and January 19th, 2021, and 4. Canceled or otherwise rescinded 5 between January 20th, 2021 and January 6th, 2025. The term Secretary means the Secretary of the Interior. SC 80,132, Ambler Road in Alaska. Anile. Section 201 of the Alaska Na-11 Interest Lands Conservation Act is amended by adding at the end, in Accord 13 ants with the provisions of this subsection. The Secretary 14 of the Interior shall approve each authorization within the 15 jurisdiction of the Secretary of the Interior with respect 16 to the Surface Transportation Corridor, and the Secretary 17 of the Interior shall promptly issue, in accordance with 18 applicable law, such rights-of-way, permits, licenses, 19 leases, certificates, or other authorizations as are NEC 20 SRE with respect to the establishment of the Surface 21 Transportation Corridor, and permit such access across all 22 federal land and public lands, including across the West 23 Earn Unit of the Gates of the Arctic National 24 Preserve, administered by the National Park Service, and 25. 592. The Central Yukon Planning Area, administered by the Bureau of Land Management. Line Statement of J.R. Eckert of D. Not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this subtitle, the Secretary shall rescind the record of decision published by the Bureau of Land Management titled Ambler Road Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement. Reinstate, as amended if the Secretary determines necessary, and publish in the Federal Register the joint record of decision, which selected Alternative A as the preferred alternative. Issue to the applicant all federal rights-of-way on federal land and public lands, and any associated permits, approvals, or other authorizations, as necessary to implement the joint record of decision published under paragraph RP. The rental fee paid by the applicant to the Bureau of Land Management for a right-of-way issued pursuant to subsection shall be $500,000 for each of fiscal years 2025 through 2034. Receipts derived from adjusted rental receipts under subsection shall be deposited into the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. 593. An action taken by the Secretary pursuant to this section is not subject to judicial review. Notwithstanding paragraph, the applicant may seek review of an alleged failure by the Secretary to act in accordance with this section. In this section, Alternative A. The term Alternative A means Alternative A as described in Section 2 of the document titled Ambler Road Environmental Impact Statement. Final Volume Chapters 1-3, Appendix A. The term applicant has the meaning given the term in the document titled Ambler Road Environmental Impact Statement. Final Volume 1, Chapters 1-3, Appendices A.F. The term federal land has the meaning given such term in Section 102 of the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. Joint record of decision. The term joint record of decision means the joint record. 594. Of decision as described in the document titled 1 Ambler Road Environmental Impact Statement, 2 Joint Record of Decision. Public lands. The term public lands has the meaning given such term in Section 102 of 5, the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation 6 Act. The term Secretary means 8, the Secretary of the Interior. 5. SEC 80,141, coal leasing, mail leasing, and O12A. Not later than 90 days after the date of 13 enactment of this act in the case of a pending application. 14 or not later than 90 days after the date of submission in 15. The case of an application submitted after the date of the 16 enactment of this act, the Secretary of the Interior shall, 17. With respect to each qualified application, 18. If not previously published for public 19 comment, publish any required environmental 20 review, 21. Finalize the fair market value of the 22 applicable coal tract, 23. Hold a lease sale with respect to the 24 applicable coal tract, 25. 595. Take all other intermediate actions necessary to grant the qualified application, and 2. After completing the actions required 3 by subparagraphs through, grant the 4 qualified application, and issue the applicable 5 lease to the person that submitted the qualified 6 application, if that person submitted the highest 7 bid in the lease sale held under subparagraph 8 and 9. With respect to previously issued coal leases, 10. Grant any additional approvals of the Department of 11, the Interior required for mining activities to come 12 months. 13. K. Notwithstanding Section 2 of the 15 Mineral Leasing Act and Section 16. 202 of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976. Not later than 90 days after the 18 date of enactment of this act, the Secretary of the Interior 19 shall make available for lease known recoverable coal re-20 sources of not less than 4 million additional acres on 21 federal land west of the 100th meridian located in the 48 contiguous states in Alaska, but which shall not in 23 include any federal land within 24. A National Monument 25. 596. A National Recreation Area. A component of the National Wilderness Preservation System. A component of the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. A component of the National Trail System. A National Conservation Area. A unit of the National Wildlife Refuge System. A unit of the National Fish Hatchery System. A unit of the National Park System. A National Preserve. A National Seashore or National Lakeshore. A National Historic Site. A National Memorial. A National Battlefield, National Battlefield Park, National Battlefield Site, or National Military Park, or a National Historical Park. D. In this section. CO lease. The term coal lease means a lease entered into by the United States as lessor through the Bureau of Land Management. 597. And an applicant on Bureau of Land Management 1 Form 3400-012 or a successor form that contains 2 terms of a coal lease. 3. Q. Qualified application. The term qualified application means an application for a coal lease pending as of the date of enactment of this act or submitted within 90 days thereafter, under the lease by application program administered by the Bureau of Land Management pursuant to the Mineral Leasing Act. SCC 80,142, Future Coal Leasing. 11. Secretarial Order 3338, issued by the Secretary of the Interior on January 15, 2016, or any other actions limiting the federal coal leasing program shall have no force or effect. SEC 80,143, Coal Royalty. R. Section 7 of the Mineral Leasing Act 17 is amended by striking 12% 18 tom and inserting 12 2%. Except such amount 19 shall be not more than 7% during the period that 20 begins on the date of enactment of subsection of Sec. 21 Shin. 17 and ends September 30th, 2034. 22. The amendment made by sub 23 section shall apply to a coal lease 24. 598. Issued under Section 2 of the Mineral Leasing Act before, on or after the date of the enactment of this subtitle, that has not been terminated. I. In general, with respect to a lease issued under Section 2 of the Mineral Leasing Act, for which the lessee has paid advance royalties under Section 7 of that Act, the Secretary of the Interior shall provide to the lessee a credit for the difference between the amount paid by the lessee in advance royalties for the lease before the date of the enactment of this subtitle and the amount the lessee would have been required to pay if the amendment made by subsection had been made before the lessee paid advance royalties for the lease. Refund of excess credits. If a credit owed to a lessee pursuant to this subsection for prior payment of advance royalties is in excess of royalties owed at the conclusion of the term of the lease, the Secretary shall reimburse the lessee an amount equal to the credit less any royalties owed during that term. 599. SEC 80,144. Authorization to mine federal minerals. I to all federal coal reserves leased to under federal coal lease MTM 97988, located within the three covered federal land, are authorized to be mined in accord 4 ants with the Bull Mountains mining plan modification. In this 6, Bull Mountains mining plan modifica. The term Bull Mountains mining plan modification means the mine number 1. Amendment 3 mining plan modification for federal coal lease MTM 97988, described in the memorandum of the Department of the Interior titled Recommendation. Regarding the previously approved mining plan modification for federal lease MTM 97988 at Signal Peak Energy, LLC's Bull Mountains Mine Number 1, located in Musselshell and Yellowstone Counties, Montana. Covered federal land. The term covered federal land means the following land comprising approximately 800 acres. The NE of Sec 8 T6N R27E, Montana Principal Meridian. The SW4 of Sec 10 T6N R27E, Montana Principal Meridian. The WS4 of Sec 22 T6N R27E, Montana Principal Meridian. 600. Part 6 NEPA. SCC 80,151. Project sponsor opt-in fees for environmental reviews. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 is amended by inserting after Section 111 the following. C-112 project sponsor opt-in fees for environmental reviews. Project sponsor. A project sponsor who intends to pay a fee under this section for the preparation or supervision of the preparation of an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement with respect to the project of the project sponsor shall submit to the council a description of the project and a declaration of whether the project sponsor intends to prepare the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement under Section 107 of this title. Notice of amount of fee. Not later than 15 days after the receipt of the information described in paragraph, the council shall provide to the project sponsor that submitted such information notice of the amount of the fee as determined under subsection 601. Payment of fee. A project sponsor may pay a fee under this section after receipt of the notice described in paragraph. Deadline for environmental reviews for which a fee is paid. Notwithstanding Section 107, an environmental assessment for which a fee was paid under this section shall be completed by not later than 6 months after the sooner of, as applicable, the dates described in clauses, end of Section 107, and an environmental impact statement for which a fee was paid under this section shall be completed by not later than 1 year after the sooner of, as applicable, the dates described in clauses, end of Section 107. FA, the amount of a fee under this section shall be, in the case of an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement to be prepared by the lead agency, 125% of the anticipated costs to prepare the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. And 602. In the case of an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement to be prepared in whole or in part by a project sponsor under Section 107. 125% of the anticipated costs to supervise preparation of and prepare the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. Administrative and JR. There shall be no administrative or judicial review of an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement for which a fee is paid under this section. FONSI. An action for administrative or judicial review of a finding of no significant impact or record of decision that is associated with an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement described in paragraph may not challenge the finding of no significant impact or record of decision based on an alleged issue with the environmental assessment or environmental impact statement. A. Fees received under this section shall be deposited into the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. 603. SCC 80,152. Rescission relating to Environmental 1 and climate data collection. The unobligated balance of any amounts made avail. 3 able under Section 60401 of Public Law 117. 169 is rescinded. Part 7, Miscellaneous. SEC 80,161, Protest Fees. Section 17 of the Mineral Leasing Act is further amended by adding at the end the following. PFF. Before processing any protest under this act, the Secretary shall collect a filing fee in the amount described in paragraph from the protester to recover the cost for processing documents filed for the protest. A. The amount described in this paragraph is calculated as follows. For each protest filed in a submission not exceeding 10 pages in length, the base filing fee shall be $150. For each protest filed in a submission exceeding 10 pages in length, in addition to the base filing fee, an assessment of $5 per page in excess of 10 pages shall apply. 604. For each protest filed in a submission that includes more than one oil and gas lease parcel, right-of-way, or application for permit to drill, an additional assessment of $10 per additional lease parcel, right-of-way, or application for permit to drill shall apply. Beginning on January 1st, 2026 and annually thereafter, the Secretary shall adjust the filing fees established in this subsection to whole dollar amounts to reflect changes in the Producer Price Index, as published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the previous 12 months. Publication of adjusted filing. At least 30 days before an adjustment to a filing fee under this paragraph takes effect, the Secretary shall publish notification of the adjustment in the Federal Register. Revenue allocation. All revenues collected under this paragraph shall be deposited in the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. 605. Part 8, Offshore Oil and Gas Leasing. SEC 80,171. Mandatory offshore oil and gas lease sales. In general. The Secretary shall hold not fewer than 30 lease sales in the Gulf of America during the 15-year period beginning on the date of the enactment of this section. Location requirement. For each lease sale held under this paragraph, the Secretary may offer for lease only an area identified as the proposed final program area in Figure S, one of the 2017-2022 Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Proposed Final Program, referenced in the Notice of Avail. Ability published by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management titled Notice of Availability of the 2017-2022 Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Proposed Final Program. Accreed requirement. For each lease sale held under this paragraph, the Secretary shall offer for lease 600. Not fewer than 80 million acres, 1 or 2. If there are fewer than 80 million 3 acres that are unleased, all such unleased 4 acres. Timing requirement. Of the not 6 fewer than 30 lease sales required under this 7 paragraph, the Secretary shall hold not fewer 8 than 1 lease sale on or before each of the full 9 lowing dates. 10. December 15, 2025. 11. March 15, 2026. August 15, 2026. March 15, 2027. 14. August 15, 2027. March 15, 2028. 16. August 15, 2028. March 17, 15, 2029. August 15, 2029. 19. March 15, 2030. 20. August 15, 2030. 21. March 15, 2031. August 22nd, 15, 2031. 23. March 15, 2032. 24. August 15, 2032. 25. 607. Lease terms and conditions. For each lease sale held under this paragraph, the Secretary shall, except as provided in clause, offer the same lease form, lease terms, economic conditions, and stipulations 4 through 10, as contained in the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management final notice of sale titled Gulf of Mexico Outer Continental Shelf Region-Wide Oil and Gas. 608. U. The Secretary is authorized to update stipulations 1 through 3 of the final notice of sale titled Gulf of Mexico Outer Continental Shelf Region-Wide Oil Gas Lease Sale 254 to reflect current conditions for lease sales held under this paragraph. D8 water term. The primary term for a lease in water depths of 800 meters or deeper issued as a result of a sale held under this paragraph shall be 10 years. Cook Inlet Planning Area. I. In general, the Secretary shall hold not fewer than 6 lease sales in the Cook Inlet Planning Area during the 10-year period beginning on the date of the enactment of this section. Allocation requirement. For each lease sale held under this paragraph, the Secretary may offer for lease only an area identified in Figure S 2 of the 2017-2022 Outer 609. Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Proposed Final Program referenced in the Notice of Availability published by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, titled Notice of Availability of the 2017-2022 Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Proposed Final Program. Accreed requirement. For each lease sale held under this paragraph, the Secretary shall offer for lease not fewer than 1 million acres. If there are fewer than 1 million acres that are unleased, all such unleased acres. Timing requirement. Of the not fewer than 6 lease sales required under this paragraph, the Secretary shall hold not fewer than 1 lease sale on or before each of the following dates: March 15, 2026, March 15, 2027, August 15, 2028, March 15, 2030, August 15, 2031, 610, March 15, 2032. 90% shall be paid to the state of Alaska. 10% shall be deposited in the Treasury as miscellaneous receipts. LSHUPFP. The lease sales held under this section shall be in addition to the lease sales held under the proposed final program for the 2024-2029 National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program referenced in lease terms and conditions. For each lease sale held under this paragraph, the Secretary shall offer the same lease form, lease terms, economic conditions, and stipulations as contained in the final notice of sale titled Outer Continental Shelf Cook Inlet Alaska Oil and Gas Lease Sale 244. Notwithstanding Section 8 and 9 of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act and 1338, and beginning in fiscal year 2035 of the bonuses, rents, royalties, and other revenues derived from leases issued pursuant to this paragraph. 611. The Notice of Availability published by the Bureau of Ocean One Energy Management, Notice of Availability of the 2024-2029 National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Proposed Final Program and Final Pro Grammatic Environmental Impact Statement. 6OR. During the period B7 beginning on the date of the enactment of this section, and 8 ending on the date that is 2 years after the date on which 9 the last lease sale required to be held under this section 10 is held. With respect to each lease sale held, lease issued, 11 any activity that requires a federal authorization, and 12 is associated with a lease issued pursuant to this title. The 13 Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, or Section 5264 of 14 Public Law 117, 169 in the Gulf of America, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Adherence with the biological opinion shall satisfy the Secretary's obligations under the Endangered Species Act of 1973 and the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. The final programmatic environmental impact statement referenced in the Notice of Availability, titled Final Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement for the 2017-2022 Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program 81 Fed Reg 83870, published November 22nd,
Welcome to Executive Order Watch.
The immigrants have arrived.
I know. I have the package.